Rebecca, thanks and good night, everyone. Rebecca, you should check your WhatsApp messages. Quite a few people are WhatsApping me to saying they can't get on. So maybe you should try to send them the new link that you sent me. I'm going to share my screen now and start. Good night, everyone.
Sure.
So basically, we have been hit with this COVID-19 problem, and the Trinidad and Tobago economy is at a really important, significant turning point in many regards, out of which could come major opportunities if managed sensibly. So the way, just to get quickly into the point, we were in February 2020, and I'm assuming people who are seeing this screen knows nothing at all about economics, so I will speak to it. But there are some people who are seasoned economists. They can also benefit from looking at the diagram. So in 2020, we were in a position such as A on the diagram there, characterized by fiscal deficits, import cover ratio that had declined continuously since 2014, official reserves that declined continually since 2014. We were in a depression. 2016 economic growth rate was minus 6.3%. 2017 was minus 2.3%. 2018 was minus 0.2%. And according to Standard & Poor's, 2019 was minus 0.2%. So we were somewhere around A in February 2020, producing some amount of non-tradable goods and some amount of tradable goods. Then came this international pandemic problem in the form of a small microbe, and World War III erupted in some form, and the economy collapsed to point B, where point B is one in which we produce a large proportion of our tradable goods and less of our non-tradable goods, especially a category of non-tradable goods classified as non-essential non-tradables. So on May the 8th, as we speak, we are at point B. So basically, the question is thrown out now to the public as to where should we go. The technocrats are working in different places. The government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago deployed the services of an elite team of 23 people now, I believe, to steer the economy forward. And we wish them the best, and we would like to see where they would take us. And this little suggestion here offers us three potential pathways, which I call Recovery Pathway 1, R1, Recovery Pathway 2, R2, and Recovery Pathway 3, R3. Recovery Pathway 1 moves us bound from B back to A. So let us assume that sometime by the end of May, the economy goes back to where it was in February 2020 in terms of the removal of all lockdown conditions. Then we will go back to recovery to situation A, and we will go back to a situation of a depression, falling import cover ratio, too little tradables produced, too much non-essential non-tradables, import cover falling, and the whole world, pub debt to GDP ratio rising, a poorly managed economy. So we in a sense, and I say this, of course, in quotation, we should be glad that COVID-19 came in part to the extent that it gives us a chance to fix a very, very messy situation. It was very bad. So I don't think any right-thinking person would want to go back to situation A. So there are two other options. We go to the left of A or we go to the right of A. To the left of A at a point such as C is one that takes us into a situation of producing more non-tradable goods than before. But that situation, a Recovery Pathway 2 would be worse than Recovery Pathway 1, because producing more non-tradable goods than before means that the debt to GDP ratio would rise faster, the fiscal deficit would worsen quicker, economic growth rate may not return, the import cover ratio will disappear quicker, official reserves will disappear quicker, and a whole host of problems that I don't think we would want to go to see with on a long-term arrangement. Already, though, I have heard little pronouncements from the the recovery team that seems that they want to go to point C as a stepping stone, so that they are going to boost the construction sector and practice certain type of activities that C becomes a possibility, labor-intensive employment in the short run, and if it's a short-run venture, fair enough. But ultimately, I think the Trinidad and Tobago economy has a grand opportunity to go on what I call recovery pathway 3, R3, and push the economy to a point such as D. How do we get from C to a point such as D, or from B to a point such as D? We would have to use up some of the green fund. We would probably have to use some of the HSF money for investment in the tradable sector via e-tech parks and other things like that. We would have to work with the private sector via public-private partnership arrangements and other interventions like that to get the economy to a point such as D. Now, what makes D optimal as compared to A and C and all other pathways that of course, that's something that people tend to overlook. You know, we take the oil and gas sector for granted. But if you have someone that can bat at the capacity of lava, let them bat. Let them make more runs. So that's obvious. Then we also want to produce more non-booming tradables, like more manufacturing goods, but manufacturing capacity utilization is at 67%. And we should really be trying our best to push that up somewhere to around 90% if we can. And so this gives us an opportunity to put in place policy measures like that. In fact, I often say in jest in public, and I hope one day somebody take me serious. If I were made the Minister of Trade, my ambition within a 3-year period would be to increase manufacturing sector employment from 50,000 to 200,000 people. And I will walk backwards from 200,000 people being employed in the manufacturing sector and fill in all the appropriate steps. Another attribute of point T2 is it involves an enhanced production of competitive import substitutes. So not all, we cannot go and produce a grand range of import substitutable goods. But when I look at the data, for example, we produce something called uncut toilet paper, but we import something called cut toilet paper. And I identified 75 categories of goods like that, where the Minister of Trade could meet with the relevant producers and sit with them and see if we could import substitute on goods, to use Ricardo Hausman example, that are very close by in the forest, and see if we can do that. The final attribute of point D is it involves a fall in the production of non-tradables from NT0, where it was at point A, to NT2. And why would you want to produce less non-tradables? Well, the truth is we cannot afford this non-essential, non-tradable lifestyle that we developed for the last 20 years. We can't. We don't have the foreign exchange. We cannot afford the lifestyle that we had, so that it is my recommendation to the state that we reduce production of non-essential, non-tradables. So that's where I think the economy should be at point D, and it should follow recovery pathway 3. I offer a number of suggestions as to how we could go on to recovery pathway 3, and I offer consumption tax as a solution as to how the economy could reduce imports of non-essential, non-tradables. So I will stop there and allow the other speakers a chance to speak. And that is my introductory comments.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Hussain. Professor Gonzalez, I would ask you to either comment on Dr. Hussain's presentation, or alternatively, you can present some of your own discussions.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca. Yes, I understand what Roger is trying to say there, which is to say that you have roughly about 4 points. You go down first, and then you try through a stimulus program, and you come back up, to a point C, which would be equivalent in terms of production to where you were originally, your point A. And then you then try to reach a higher level of production at a higher production curve, which would have a better combination of tradables and non-tradables. The point for me really is, how do you get there? I think we all agree that the C point is really a temporary point. It's not really a stable point. It's something that we are doing just in order to ensure in the short run we provide some jobs and so forth. But we are looking really for a new type of economy, which will be transformed when we come back as we go away from point C. Let me say that the crisis, in my view, and I think Roger hinted at this, the crisis is a blessing in disguise, because it accounts for quite a while. And what I observe now is that it's the first time in our history we can probably say that the oil economy or the energy economy is not going to come back. It's not a low-cost gas producer, and the idea of looking forward to producing more gas and looking forward to higher prices of gas and higher prices of oil, that is certainly not in the cards. So it means that all of those who benefited from that non-trade sector, where you had a boom and they were then going to real estate and they were then going to these huge malls and all these various large groceries and stuff like that, car dealerships and all of this sort of thing, and the construction companies that are selling, all of these, that bulk of the non-tradable sector, which has collapsed, and it shows you at every boom, the non-tradable sector is the first to go. But as it goes down, it stays quiet and it waits for another boom. Now, as I'm seeing it, there's no chance of another boom coming right away. And here's the opportunity you have now to really kill that traditional non-tradable sector that you had over the years. And how you go about is what I'm basically concerned about. How you set up a framework, what I call an industrial policy framework, that would allow you to prevent that inefficient, wasteful, non-traditional sector from coming back in let's say 5 years. Let's say even if by chance say a boom comes back, you can still kill it in a sense that you would be on a path which would in a way prevent it from coming back, because it would not be profitable. The whole idea is that how do you set up a framework that would not make non-tradables profitable again, and in such a way that it doesn't make sense investing in that. Now there's a whole lot of money that has been sunk into that sector, and it's lying low somewhere. It's probably some of it is out of this country and so forth. And people are waiting for it to come, a boom to come back to revive that sector. We would like to see that money invested in the tradable sector. And I think this is the task really for change or transformation, is really to see how industrial policy could recruit that investment and channel it into what you may call exportables. That's one aspect of tradables, or importables, which is another aspect, which is what Roger referred to as the competitive import substitutes, or to what I call another sector, but a very small minor sector, but which I think we need to pay attention to, and I'm more and more convinced listening to the debate out here, which we call the essential goods sector, which in the future we have to build and which we may have to pay a certain price for. It may not be very competitive, and we may have to do it simply because of the fact that the world is turning towards protectionism. It's becoming a vicious world. Up to today, I was listening to a debate out there in foreign policy on it, and it's clear to me that unless in the future you're producing some essential food items and you're producing some medical goods, you're going to be left out. And this I would like to see us do with CARICOM. So those three sectors, I think, is where we would like to see investment go in the next round. And the question is, how do we set up an incentive framework that could channel that investment into those sectors? I think this has been eluding us for quite a long time. and we haven't been able to design a policy framework that provides the incentives for people to go into those three sectors that I spoke about. I have some ideas as how you do that. I have an idea of how you employ not the traditional effective protection approach. You go a bit beyond that. Neither the conventional real exchange rate approach. I think you need to go a bit beyond that and look at really the whole range of incentives and policies that tend to favor certain industries, and look to see how you could swing that balance in favor of people producing tradable goods. It's a task that I've seen others done, but can be done. If you do it, you would ensure that those who go into the tradable sector will tend to make it. It would be profitable for them, and they will have an interest in seeing a rate of return higher than if they go into the non-tradable sector. Let me leave it at that, and we'll come back later and discuss some of these ideas later. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Gonzalez. Professor Watson, can you go ahead to make your contribution?
Thank you very much, Rebecca. I'm going to try and go as fast as I can because there's so much to say. First of all, let me say that I share the point raised by both Roger and Anthony about this opportunity that is provided to us here. But my own feeling is we now have a chance to start, as the Latin would say, tabula rasa. We could do what we wanted to do and ought to have done since whatever time ago. And I think we have to go a little bit beyond the short-term recovery that Roger emphasized. That is necessary, yeah? And I want to say I generally share his view, although I have some doubt about some of its successes. In particular, when I hear him talk about developing and pushing the manufacturing sector, what is the real problem with our manufacturing sector? One, it is largely concerned with exports into the CARICOM region. And I want to, if I have the time during the discussion, I'm going to talk about what I think is the importance of CARICOM in the time to come. And many CARICOM countries, including those nearest and dearest us, are going to get a tremendous blow for tourism. In fact, if Anthony thinks that the oil sector is not going to help us come back, and I do share that opinion, I think they're going to have to be thinking very seriously about what they're going to do with tourism. I am very worried about countries like the Bahamas and even Jamaica and Barbados, who depend so much on tourism. And those tourism receipts are the ones that finance our manufacturing sector. We get a lot of the foreign exchange, that is used in this country is by the manufacturing sector. And they are almost always net users of foreign exchange. So they are not providing, and that, although I am quite aware that there are some who will do that, and we have to concentrate on that group of people. I am thinking of a long-term strategy. We should be thinking not only of just recovery, we should be thinking of it in the short run, that we must recover, and we're going to have to think about it given the shortcomings that we are going to face with the oil sector, the energy sector, I should say, the fact that our production is falling, the fact that the price of these items are not going to be as good as we would like them to be, or very unlikely to be, although I hate to predict the price of energy products. And we are going to have to depend more and more on non-energy production. But there is going to be the fact that we are, the way our manufacturing sector is now structured, and the target countries are generally people who are depending on tourism and who are not going to be able to make that manufacturing sector thrive as we would like it, as we would like it to. I think we have an opportunity. Now, I want to then go beyond what Roger is saying now, in the sense that I want us to start thinking about what we should be doing to encourage precisely that movement away from what we now have, the oil and gas sector, even the manufacturing sector as it currently stands. And how do we get into the production of goods and services that can earn us foreign exchange? And I am seeing several problems to begin with. First of all, there's the word innovation and entrepreneurship. I think in the medium to long run, we are going to have to find ways of encouraging people to look beyond the goods and services that we currently have, or even if we use the current goods and services, to find innovative ways of making them available, not only in the CARICOM region, but outside of the CARICOM region. In fact, I think more than ever, the validity of the arguments of those who went before us, the Brewsters, the McIntyres, all of the Thomases, all of these who spoke to the glowing, the joys of having an economy where we have enough land space, where we have enough water, where we have enough oil and so on. We are going to have, in my view, it may not be true because at this point in time, a lot is uncertain. We are going to have to be thinking a lot about using the land space in the rest of the country, and the rest of the Caribbean, the rest of the CARICOM region, to do the food security that people talk about. I cannot imagine that Trinidad and Tobago would ever even come close to having, and when you talk about food security, of course, you'll have to define it. As you define an import cover, you're going to have to define what it is, because I don't think in the long run we could do it anyway, but we stand a much better chance if we find a way of using the arable land of the CARICOM region and not just Trinidad and Tobago. I cannot imagine that we will be able to do that alone. So in the short to medium, the medium to long, we are going to have to start thinking strategically and not just tactically. How do we get out of this mess? We have to get out of this mess. But what we should be saying to ourselves is our grandchildren 50 years from now should not be facing this situation, no matter what happens. Of course, you could never tell what could happen. Roger used the word World War III, and things can be as bad as that. But we have to become a little bit more innovative. I don't know how we're going to do this in all honesty. We have to start looking beyond what we are accustomed doing. There's a citation from Drucker, which I saw the other day, and I think I should say the greatest danger in times of turbulence is not turbulence itself, but to act with yesterday's logic. The logic here meaning reasoning. We cannot continue behaving in the old way when there is a brave new world opening up before us. That has to do with everything. That has to do with the restructuring of the health sector, the education sector. All of these things are not going to be as they were yesterday. We have had a shock that has taken us from one world into another, and we have to start thinking of going in that direction. So we have to think beyond just the short-term recovery. We have to think about how we organize ourselves as a society, how we restructure our institutions. We have to start thinking about the society that we would want to have. I myself have in my mind, and I could respond to questions on this, about what the kind of society I would like to have. But once we have that, we now must plan a roadmap. And the roadmap is not just for the immediate recovery, although that is going to be extremely important, because, you know, as Keynes would say, in the long run, we are all dead. But we have to be thinking of going way, way, way beyond just recovering from COVID-19. Thanks very much.
Professor Watson, thank you very much for your contribution. Before I let the audience pose questions to you guys directly, I'm going to ask Mr. Small to put forward his contribution. Mr. Small, you can go ahead.
You have to unmute him. You have to unmute him. His mic is muted. All right, he's unmuted now.
Sorry about that, folks. Sorry, good evening, everyone. Unlike the three fine gentlemen who went before me, I'm not an economist. Okay, Roger would have asked me to make a contribution to this audience essentially because I bring a wealth of knowledge and some experience from the technology side of things. Okay, and I think I should preface my comments by so saying, okay, because I understand fully what the points are being made, you know, by the three economists on the panel. Okay, and while doing so, I was actually taking some notes. So as a country, let's look at it bluntly. One, we can't feed ourselves. We've never been able to fully feed ourselves. okay, and then the tastes of our professionals and all our citizenry actually over time has become global in terms of the demand and the wants, okay, so that, you know, like, so according to what Dr. Watson had to say, Professor Watson, okay, I would endorse that. I don't think, you know, like, we'll ever natively as a country be able to grow those goods and that and food stuff that's required to feed the demands or the taste of the population. Two, we could questionably say that we can't clothe ourselves. Okay, in as much as, you know, we had a cotton industry way back when, okay, and we do some light manufacturing, you know, in the clothing space. Okay, quite a lot of our clothes are imported. Okay, we can't shelter ourselves. When you consider the HTC has something of the order of 160,000 persons applications for people looking for housing. Okay, it says that, you know, like, historically, for all the benefits of the oil industry and all the funds that would have passed through Trinidad and Tobago, some of the fundamentals that we would have needed and we still need as a society, we have not been able to independently achieve. Okay, furthermore, okay, again, to endorse what Professor Gonzalez had to say, okay, essentially, we have a new kind of economy that we're going to be faced with. Bottom line. Okay, so the traditional way of doing things mandatorily has to change. Look at us now. We are actually sitting and having a conference, you know, like in what would have previously been something where someone would actually have to get a brick and mortar space somewhere. Okay, invite people to attend. There'll be consumption of gasoline to get there. There'll be consumption of lighting to be there. There'll be consumption of everything else, okay, in order to hold a conference of this nature. What we are doing now is now going to become more or less the norm going forward, okay, and where it is that we are at disparate parts of the country, and there's quite a possibility disparate parts of the world getting together, okay, and essentially sharing intelligence in order to succeed. One of the organizations that I'm very much proud to be a part of, the IEEE, okay, they have a magazine that they push out every couple of months, as the case might be. And they've been touting for quite some time now, okay, the end of the oil and gas industry and its impact on the world, renewables and its place in terms of a potential replacement, the cost of, you know, using renewables, you know, like going down over time. But then even more than that, they talk about data becoming the new oil. There was actually a headline, okay, in one of their magazines, data becoming becoming the new oil. And I think that's very important, you know, to discuss, because with everything we've spoken about, changing the way we do things, fundamental to that change is being able to have access to data, which is a part of the role and function of the economists, and being able to use that data into the benefit of the output that you're trying to achieve. Dr. Hussain would have spoken about manufacturing. Okay, I endorse that fully. There is a need to expand the manufacturing sector. But then again, okay, with today's technology as it exists, okay, do we go and this is a policy decision that needs to be looked at. If we look at expanding the manufacturing sector, as he said, he would have been, that would have been his effort as the Minister of Trade, okay, by hiring more people, where it is that the unit costs of goods are going to go up, okay, and where our natural labor productivity, let's face it, in Trinidad and Tobago is low, or do we look at expanding the manufacturing sector by the introduction of technology, or not the introduction of technology, I imagine some of it is already there, but by advanced use or more use of technology so that the unit prices go down. So there's that dichotomy, I think, that would need to be understood, okay, from a government perspective, from a society perspective, being able to employ, being able to engage, being able to reward, okay, every member of society so that they can have some decent standard of living. But then the flip side of it is where we are as a small country in a bigger world, okay, and where, okay, what we're trying to achieve, okay, when you look at technology as being one of the catalysts of that new economy, okay, could very well be, okay, that, you know, we have to take, you know, a radical view, okay, you know, we have to look at structural economic adjustment around, instead of going the route of trying to hire as many as we can, being as efficient as we can in government, in manufacturing, in agriculture, in everything else that we do, okay, and upskill our people, okay, instead of having them doing the menial mechanical tasks that can be done by machinery and others, okay, to have it be done essentially in a fashion where they are now fixing the machines behind the machines. Clerical functions that we know it is going to go away. Okay, that's been happening for quite some time now. Okay, you know, like menial tasks now becoming more mundane. They can become done. They can be done by robotics and so on as like. Okay, so again, to all that is being done, COVID-19 is actually a realization. And I think I have to agree with everybody on that. Okay, but how do the realization, and from where I sit, is more of one, excuse me, let me just take off my phone here. Yeah, it's more of the role that technology and data needs to play, absolutely needs to play in our transformation, as opposed to make work programs, short-term programs to do stimuluses of stimuli of varying kinds, okay, that are going to solve a problem, put a band-aid in the short term, but not necessarily solve our problems in the long term. So that's my point. Rebecca, back to you.
Rebecca.
Thank you very much, Mr. Small. Just as a matter of coalescing the conversations that has been put forward by each of our panelists, you know, one of the things that we have to highlight is that a new normal does not only apply to the TNT case, but it is something that's global. So that in crafting a strategy and crafting that vision that Professor Watson talked about, we definitely need to consider what are the environmental changes that are, of course, going to be necessary at the global level. So at this time, I want to open up the floor. I know that Dr. Ramkissoon had a question. I would like to ask any person who has a question or a contribution to please raise your hand, and we can take the questions and or comments incrementally. So, and we can take it in batches of 3, for example. So when you are starting your question, just please state who you are and which one of the panelists you are directing the question to. So Dr. Ramkissoon had his hand up first, so I'm going to open the floor to him.
Good night, Rebecca. Thanks very much, and good night, gentlemen. Very useful contributions, as always. I want to, in fact, start from the point made by Rebecca in that the world is also changing, and the switch from non-tradables to tradables must take that into account. In particular, some of the markets that might have existed before COVID-19 may not exist or not exist in the form that we think. And therefore, in thinking about the medium to long term, we have to think about what new industries are arising, given what we might have considered pre-COVID-19 and indeed even during that time. I want to turn in particular to that point that all speakers seem to be making. We need to think about a different world, and we need to switch from non-tradables to tradables. Of course, that has been the major theme that many of us have argued for quite a while. So to move in particular from point C to D, Roger, 2 things. One, what must be the conversation that we must have with the population, with ourselves, with the business community, with labor? What is the nature of that conversation that we must have in terms of doing things differently? And secondly, is there not a danger in spending too much time on point C, on trying to provide subsidies, provide the social support that is necessary in some cases? Are the 2 points mutually exclusive? Must we solely focus on one? And must we not be careful that while we focusing on C, we in fact use up all the foreign exchange that we have and create some other kinds of problems that we may not be able to recover from? I'll stop there. Thank you very much, Rebecca.
Dr. Ramkisoon, thank you very much. Dr. Hussain, before you attempt a response to that, I see a young lady by the name of Anne in our chat group that has her hand up as well. So I'm going to invite Anne to unmute your mic and propose your question to the specific panelist, please. Anne, please go ahead and ask the question. Okay. I'm not sure if that was an accident, but I'm also now going to open up the floor to any other person who might have a question or a comment directed to either one of your panelists. No questions? Okay, I'm going to put a few questions forward. Professor Watson, you spoke about understanding the new vision and setting that out in a clear way. What are some of the key aspects in your mind that should be included in that visioning exercise for TNT over the short to medium to long-term period? That's one. And a question to Dr. Gonzalez. Understandably, industrial policy, at least in the context that I understand it, industrial policy, it's basically the frame, and it forms a large part of the environment within which production happens. Where does, how should I put it? How do we begin to cater for those changes in the global space and nimbly craft our industrial policy going forward? We have a question by Mr. Andy Knight. So Mr. Knight, you can go ahead and unmute your mic and ask the question before the panelists take the cadre of questions.
Is this our Andy Knight?
Yes, yes.
How are you, Andy?
Yes. Rebecca, we are not hearing him.
Yeah.
No, but he is unmuted. I'm not sure why. Mr. Knight, are you hearing us?
It's Professor Knight, eh?
Professor Knight, I apologize.
Not hearing him. I'm seeing him.
Okay, I sent him a message.
Professor Knight, I see that he's speaking. You can also consider typing your question in. We'd be able to pick it up.
No, let's hear him. It's oh, Lord. Andy, we're not hearing you. I don't know if you heard that.
We'll have to get back to him. Let him know we're not hearing him.
Let's provide a round of answers. I sent him a message,
okay.
and we will get back to him. What do you think, Rebecca?
Yes, that's fine, Dr. Hussain. Go ahead and proceed. Okay,
so I'm going to respond by asking a question and then answering the question that was asked of me. My comment to Professor Watson is, whilst I like his idea and it sounds useful, it sounds flowery, and I would like him to lay out for me, let's say, 5 steps that could make what he says more practical and attainable in the context of our Trinidad and Tobago economy. I ask that because, to me, it is easier for someone like Lara to play golf than to play basketball or to become a long-distance swimmer. And I'm not saying that Lara cannot become a long-distance swimmer. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that the quantum of investment needed to retool the biomechanical skills of Lara into becoming a long-distance swimmer will take quite a bit of training. And so I would like to hear how, in the context of a mature energy sector, so we have a limited amount of revenues to collect there, how do we bridge that gap, which seems to me very enormous, in layers? And how do we earn foreign exchange along the way to get there? And in response to the question that was raised by Ronald, that's the fear that we all have. The fear that we all have, and that we have made errors upon errors in the past, is of going to points like C and staying there. And when one works out the period 2000 to 2019 and calculate the sum of the energy revenues, you get $342 billion. And when you work out the sum of one item on government expenditures, that's transfers and subsidies, it works out to $362 billion. So in that time period, about 20 billion more alone was spent on one item of government expenditure. It's total ludicrous, crazy economics that I never come to terms with. And in this time period, what will get us from C to D is the moment. We have a moment in time where we could correct now all the errors we made in the past. The economic recovery team could get back to us at the end of the month and have all the attributes of C laid out and D laid out in a very crystal clear scientific way, that we have a clean roadmap, and they would stop talking about the import substitutables as they are, and they would go more onto the tradable pathway as we suggested here, and everything would be fine. And the fundamental message that has to come from the economic recovery team, in my judgment, has to be how to save foreign exchange and how to generate foreign exchange. How to save foreign exchange and how to generate foreign exchange. And that has to be the message that will be, that has to be beaten continuously moving forward. One more question to Wayne Small. Wayne, how do we get government to adopt some of this technology that you probably speak so often of, and in my mind that you are the best at in Trinidad and Tobago? How do we convince the government to do these things? So that's my comment.
Okay, and Professor Knight typed in his comments, his question in the chat. So I'm going to direct this question to Dr. Gonzalez. And the question is, what will it take for Caribbean countries to transform their economies from linear to circular? So Professor Watson, you can
all right, let me begin, because I think in answering the question you raised, I'm hoping to answer Rogers as well. I think there is an inevitability of being flowery, that's the word that you use, at this juncture, and it's largely because of the point raised by Rebecca and by all of us, but specifically mentioned by Rebecca and by Ronald, that we really don't know what is going to be happening. So if we start pointing at specific steps to take, we could be really spinning top in mud, because at any point in time, the conditions are likely to change. In fact, we know that they are changing now. And that's why, in answering to the vision, I think we have to ask ourselves, what kind of society we want to see? What do we want to see a human being? What will a human being look like in Trinidad and Tobago and in the Caribbean? Because I cannot imagine we could solve this problem without without coming together. But let's concentrate on what we have in the case of Trinidad and Tobago at this point in time. And we have to say, and what this crisis is showing in many countries, the United States in particular, is if, as the Calypsonian says, if you don't have money, a dog is better than you. And some of you would not be familiar with that very, very old Calypso, I think, song by the Growling Tiger. And people are dying not so much because they cannot, the technology is not there to see to them. They can't afford, they don't have the insurance and so on. So we have to be thinking of a society that does not make these things happen to us. We are not as bad in that sense as the United States of America, but the glaring inequities in our society have come to the fore, both here and elsewhere. So we have to be thinking of a society where we are thinking of eliminating these things, about providing a health sector, an education sector, a general social sector that we could feel happy to live in as human beings. When we do that, we can start thinking of the specific steps that we will take. And some of these things are going to change. You look at the oil and gas sector at this point in time. Clearly, all the evidence is showing that hydrocarbons are not going to be cutting it very soon. We may have to think of energy in the form of alternative forms, such as solar, such as wind, such as anything else. Shale gas and all of these things are dominating in the outside world, and we are not going to be able to use. I am convinced, just as how tourism is taking a lashing from which it's not going to recover, in particular cruise tourism, on which many of the smaller islands depend. We are not going to recover from that. I mean, and so we have to be thinking about alternative products, some of which may not yet even be with us, and that's where the airy-fairiness comes in as well. Our manufacturing sector is too dependent on other people generating foreign exchange for it to survive. The manufacturing sector that we are thinking about in the future has to be generating its own foreign exchange for us and for other people to survive. And the specific steps that it's going to be very, very difficult to do that, because there are a lot of bad habits to be broken. I want to take you up, Roger, on the resource endowment. You raised the Haussmann thing, and I think it's something that we should very seriously consider in analyzing this thing. If we want to identify products that we can indeed become proficient in, we have to do and follow some of the advice of the Haussmann model, where we look at our resource endowment, in particular our human capital capabilities, what we can do. And these are studies that need to be done to know how we could become, let's say, to move from a society that is dependent on oil to dependent, as Mr. Small says, on data, on the use and the generation of data. How do we do these things? And the way, if it is one thing that the energy sector has prepared us for, is a whole gamut of capabilities that have nothing to do with oil, including, I dare say, in the accounting sector, because the oil services sector is rich in capabilities that are outside of the energy sector, about the administrative services that we have offered over the years. We don't know, and we should be able to target things that can be there. So in a word, Roger, I am not going to put my neck out in any specific step, because unless we identify where we want to go from here to the next day, we are not going to be able to identify these steps. Once these things are identified, and that's where we must collectively think. If you wish, the steps that we must take, we must collectively, and I am hoping that this COVID-19 team does that, we must collectively put our minds together and work out the kind of society that we want. What we do not want to happen again, we must not be depending on one product as we are depending now. We must not be put at, we must become the possible victims of starvation because of what we have now. And then we are going to see the steps clearly that we need to take. There is an immediate recovery that we need to go through. And I will support some of the steps you are taking in that regard. But I'm telling you, I feel even some of these will fail, because at the minute you take them, they may become irrelevant. And therein lies the problem that we take. I want to stop there.
Thank you very much, Dr. Watson. And just to reiterate, definitely what is needed at this time is thought leadership, and leadership that projects these visions and expectations of the future in such a way that it allows us to map out a tiered response as an economy to this challenge. I'm going to ask Dr. Gonzalez to take the additional question that is posted by Dr. Ramkisoon, and the question is, how can we get the synergies and partnerships going to allow this kind of planning to happen? And Dr. Gonzalez, you can take it from an industrial policy perspective. Dr. Gonzalez?
Yes, thank you, Rebecca. Let me back up for a second and say that we are talking about developing a vision. And I think we have to be careful at this point in that, at least my assumption when I came here is that I'm not coming to develop a whole philosophical outlook as to where we should go as a country. Okay, I have my views on that, and those of you who know me on the chat will know I talk about this all the time. I talk about the 40 years of transformation that we need in order to bring about change in the country, how important cultural changes are, and all of these things. But I think in this context now, we're talking about, even though we cannot see the future clearly, and there's so much uncertainty, yet still we have to be specific to some extent to be able to say, okay, here's a framework that may work. We know there's so much uncertainty there that tomorrow we may have to revise it, but at least we can say, here's a framework that will be useful, and we can adjust it as we go along. That may give us a better chance. I think that is what we're here for. We cannot just say, well, let's wait and see what is going to happen here. No, we have to be proactive, and we have to decide, okay, this is the strategy here that will help us get out of this. So that the environmental changes are something we're not going to know, and we still have to go ahead and start planning in such a way with a certain amount of foresight. At least what we can see, and then go ahead and see how we can best manage as we go there and we adjust. And basically, we are talking about certain economic factors. And let me say that we won't have a society unless we have a strong economy. We won't have a social sector unless we have a strong economic sector. So that we have to be very careful how we go forward here. I think so far we have managed pretty well on the social side because the economy was strong and the oil and gas was essentially providing that, but we cannot bank on that for the future. But let me come back to this question about how I see specifically things evolving. When I said that the energy would not come back, I didn't mean that the energy sector will totally disappear. There are resources in the energy sector that are still quite useful. We have a lot of very good energy services that we can use to sell overseas. We have been selling them, and we can develop that further. Oil and gas is not going to disappear. Places around us are going to produce them much cheaper. And we can probably build ourselves into an energy hub here. I see we've been talking about this with respect to Suriname and with respect to Guyana. So that there are possibilities within the energy sector. Now, if I understand Hausman properly, he was basically saying that you cannot jump from the energy tree into the non-energy tree because the resources that are tied up in energy do not allow you to make that leap. Okay, so you're that kind of monkey that you're stuck on the energy tree. Now, I do not think that the world is as neat as that. I think there are lots of resources within the energy sector that will allow you to do other things. And mind you, I have not fully explored all the possibilities that there still exist within the energy sector, quite outside of just producing more gas or more oil. Okay, There are lots of other possibilities. I've seen others who have done it, and they've pointed out where there are a lot of possibilities of diversifying within energy, like going into a whole lot of services and other things. But let me say that even you cannot totally write off the energy sector in the sense that it cannot provide certain kind of synergies or certain kind of linkages. For instance, we were talking about the PPE, the personal protective equipment, and many people have pointed out, okay, there are resources within the energy sector which should allow you to produce some of these things. I think there are also already one or two producers in that sector that have started to do some of this. So that we have resources there that could be properly utilized and produce a lot of things, and so we just have to, in a way, put our mind of it. But my basic point is essentially, and I think we all agree on that, we have to build a non-energy sector. How do we start that? Where do we start that? I am not saying that we pick winners. I'm not saying that, and I could read out a whole number of sectors over the years that we have identified it. Most of them are not really in manufacturing. Most of them are in services, maritime services, educational services, tourism, a whole host of them. We have some still in manufacturing where we think we are competitive, things like beverages and metal processing and so forth. But the fact of the matter is that these things have not really materialized. And although I think that there are many possibilities in these sectors and we need to explore them, and a lot of them were developed actually in consultation with the private sector. They were not just developed by consultants or bureaucrats. They sat down and discussed it with the private sector, and you see a whole host of them. There are a lot of them in the government trade policy document that came out not too long ago. The point, however, is that at least they give us, and I accept them for what they were, they give us an idea of what people see as the possibilities. And remember that some of our business people are already in there, and some of them are exporting. We export tourism as a service here. It's not as good as it should be, and we'd like to develop it further, but some of us are already in there. We export beverages. All parts of the world, Angostura and all of them exporting beverages. We like to expand that further. Okay, so some of us are already in there doing very good work, and we need to expand it. We are not happy with the fact that too many of them stay within CARICOM, but there's a reason for that, and this is what I think we need to explore. It's not that manufacturing is totally negative. Manufacturing is competing with a lot of imported goods that come in here at pretty low duty, and the manufacturers, in a sense, have to compete with them. There are very few manufacturers that operate in a kind of non-tradable basis, right? Which they're totally shut off because of transportation or because of trade barriers. We have lower trade barriers quite a lot over the years. We have brought down trade barriers to about 7% now. Now, you know, it's said in the literature that 15% is where you shut off the world. If you're operating at 7%, you have to some extent to compete. The manufacturers here have been pushed in a sense to compete. They haven't been pushed as far as I think that they should be pushed. And here's where I think that you have to design a new policy framework to get them more to go out there. And the two key things that I'm seeing is that essentially the way you approach industry in the country is, and here I'm including services and so on, you basically tend to have a set of incentives, taxes and some subsidies and various kinds of support. But you don't look at the problems that each particular sector faces. Let's take exportables. Think about what people are exporting here face. These are usually small businesses, small and medium-sized businesses that just do not have the marketing or the production economies of scale to be able to survive outside or to compete effectively outside it. They face a whole host of barriers, all set of problems, not to mention all that we have internally in terms of export facilitation. Okay, we have a whole host of problems here that we talk. Roger speaks all the time about the ease of doing business, and he would tell you, for instance, that the trading across barriers is one of the biggest obstacles that we have in the country. Now, if you're into exporting business, that is what you're faced with. You know, all the congestion on the port and all of the confusion about transportation and so forth. So we have to sit down with these people and begin to see how we help them and how we give them some degree of preference over people who are not into exporting. People who are trying to, in retail business, or they're running a casino, or they're running some kind of construction company that has a monopoly on construction of certain buildings and so forth. So the point I'm simply making is that we need to work with what we have and try to develop something out of it. And there are several possibilities I'm seeing here. The world is not going to change 360 degrees overnight. The world is going to change. in some ways. Certainly, I think if you're in tourism, you have to be careful and you have to watch it. You see, the airlines may not be flying in the same way, hotels may not be able to accommodate people in the same way, and there's going to be some structural changes there, and you would have to adjust. And it may take you probably 2 years, 3 years before the industry comes back to some kind of normalcy, and we'll have to adjust to that. But the point I'm simply making is that once you set the framework in such a way that we can adapt and we can get benefit out of exporting, and I keep emphasizing all this thing, this question of exporting and competing. I don't think we can go back to import substitution under protection, or what someone called this idea of import displacement. I think import displacement is even worse than import substitution. Import displacement, as I remember, it involves having to invent commodities to replace the imports that you used to bring in. I think Lloyd Best used to say, used to look at a big tree on campus and say, you know, the leaves of this tree could be used to replace Colgate toothpaste. But we don't do it because we don't involve ourselves in research and development. If we involve ourselves in research and development, we could invent a whole lot of products that could not only replace the imports, I'm using import, it's displacement, but displace them. That is to say, we totally create an alternative product, which we find much more suitable. I think going that route is going to be much more difficult in terms of the cost of the resources that we'll have to put into them and the kind of support we need from the state to do that. So I tend to feel like, look, we need to make a progressive shift in a certain way, and we can do this by providing the right incentives to our entrepreneurs for them to do that. I agree with all that has been said about innovation and what we have to do with entrepreneurship, but we have to work with what we have. We can't just recreate the world overnight. It's going to take us a long time to be an innovative society. Lots of others who started before us and they haven't gotten there yet. So that will take some time. But I tend to feel that we can produce a lot of competitive goods based on the fact that we have location, we have human capital, we have a fair amount of experience in manufacturing, and certain other assets which would give us a comparative advantage in certain things. We don't necessarily, I mean, there are lots of societies today that exist which are not innovative societies. They're just societies that are competitive on the basis of certain kind of assets that they have. As they used to say, for instance, the British barely survive basically on tourism, and people come in to see the Queen. And the Queen you repay in Buckingham Palace every year, and more people will come, and so forth and so on. So there are lots of assets you have that you can use, that we haven't used, and we could bring them to the fore. Our culture is a source of competitive advantage that we can use and change, and we'll be trying some of that in terms of the entertainment industry and so forth. So my feeling is, to sum up, is that we have the basics, in my view, to work with. And once we set the policy framework, we can, in a way, survive. We can even go further than survival and probably develop a very mature and a flexible economy. Now, I'm not sure I've answered all Ronald's questions. I think Andy asked about going from a
linear to a circular
economy.
Yes.
Let me say that I've read a bit about the circular economy. I don't think I'm an expert in it. I haven't really studied it enough. Certainly, it involves an economy that sort of maximizes the use of all the resources in the country, and you try to, in a way, in an environmentally friendly way, you try in a way to use all the waste products you have intact and get them into production, and so you have a kind of circular form of production. I think some of this is certainly useful. I think we have started here looking at things like plastics, how we could recycle the plastics in the country, and a lot of our waste, probably make energy out of them and so forth. I don't know how far we have reached on that, but I would say to you that in a sense, insofar as this may not get us the export economy that we need, I think it may not serve us to the extent that I see necessary. I think we're still an economy that is highly dependent on exports. We can't get away from that because of our smallness. And we need, in a sense, to go after commodities in which we have some kind of competitive advantage. So I would just reserve my position on that because I don't fully understand, as I said, the circular economy. But let me just round up by referring to Ronald's question about synergies and partnerships and so forth. I tend to feel that we have not fully utilized all the possibilities we have here as a country. We have a tremendously diverse country with people from all over the world that have contacts with all over the world. And they bring a lot to the table and in terms of what kind of access they can get us to resources outside here. And I don't think we have fully utilized that to our benefit. I mean, we can go to the African continent, we can go to the Asian continent and so forth. And to a large extent, we get a fair amount of access in these places, which is very beneficial, could be down to our benefit. And I think we need to use that a bit more. We have been engaging in some partnerships in terms of foreign investment and so forth. And I would certainly, yes, I round up just in two minutes. Let me say on the question of foreign investment, on that aspect of partnership, I wanted to say that that in my view is another aspect which is very, very critical. In the sense that all I've said about tradables and non-tradables, I think foreign investment has to get a very kind of special place in when we're discussing this, because a lot of what we want to do, we do not have the entrepreneurship, we do not have the capacity to do it on our own, given the nature of the world economy, given the fact that the way people are developing supply chains and large corporations are organizing production, it may not be possible for us to get in these things unless we get into bed with them. So that I tend to see a special role for foreign investment, and I tend to see this taking place in a better context. We have had serious problems here in attracting foreign investment in the non-energy sector. I can't think of one serious foreign investment in the non-energy sector which exports, okay? And I think this has happened because of the way the Dutch disease has operated in the country, made us very uncompetitive and unproductive as a society, and that has kind of caused foreign investors to shy away. Now we're looking at this in the context of special economic zones. For instance, the whole idea of the Phoenix Park complex is a good way to start looking at it. I don't know to what extent some of that may still be viable in terms of how supply chains are being restructured. But however they're being restructured, we need to look at them. They may be coming closer to market. They may be coming on a new basis of security, which is to say that you want to be sure that you could manipulate all the companies into supply chain, so you bring them closer to market. However they're changing, I think we need to look at them and see how we could utilize some of these industrial parks to be able to attract more investment. And there's a lot that, you know, I think Roger and myself, we have to say about industrial parks and how they function in this space. But we'll come back to that later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Gonzalez. As a secondary round of question, I would like you to consider this additional question that was put.
I think there was a question posed for I am always tempted to say Professor Small. I know you wouldn't agree, but I think there was a question posed at Wayne. Can you get him?
Yes, there are actually several questions that have been put forward to Mr. Small, and they relate to the digital divide. Questions coming in from Gabriella and from Ryan Simongal. So I'd like to ask Mr. Small to address those questions in his response. But before I do, I wanted to let Professor Gonzalez look at the question from Professor Knight for the second round of his responses. And the question is, how do we build more resilience within our vulnerable societies? And is there a role for CARICOM in conceptualizing and coordinating resilience? And additionally, before I hand over to Mr. Small, there is a question here that has been put forward by Mr. Jared Darlington, and I'd like Professor Watson to take a stab at it in his response after Mr. Small. So Mr. Small, go ahead to respond to the questions.
What's the question raised by Mr. Darlington? I'm not seeing it.
The question is, hold on.
I believe the inevitable changes required could be implemented by the academic fraternity. Will political buy-in or will it require political buy-in? And if so, how do you engage the political directorate? Okay, but so you can look at it. So there's a little bit further up if you look at the chat column. Okay, but if I may, if I'll step in. Okay, thanks again, Rebecca. You know, like for asking my response on some of the questions that were posed. I was reading them as we go along. So first things first. While we are chatting, I bothered to Google who are the top 10 companies, largest companies in the world by market cap today. And I knew the answer, but I just wanted to make sure that I was not, you know, like speaking out of turn when I gave the answer. And of that list, there are 5 companies which are technology companies: Microsoft, Apple, Alphabet, which is the trading name for Google, Facebook, and Tencent. And if you know anything about, well, we all know about these companies. I won't assume that you don't. Okay. In truth and in fact, the majority portion of what they manufacture is a tangible, intangible software. Okay. Microsoft might make some tablets. Apple does make devices, but the devices are actually a spin-off of a software ecosystem. Okay. Google makes hardly nothing physical. Facebook, Tencent, okay? So just to make that point, and again, I remind you where I started, these are the top 10 largest companies by market capitalization in the world. Where were they 25 years ago? Where were they 30 years ago? Some of them did not even exist. In the top 10, okay, there are another 5, 2 of which are consumer services, Amazon being one of them, Alibaba being the second. And again, for the most part, they do not manufacture anything themselves. They are brokers of product. They're not building out huge supply chain networks, warehousing, and the like, but the majority portion of their revenue is buying, selling, trading. The last 3 that make up the 10, okay, are actually financial services companies. Berkshire Hathaway, everybody knows Warren Buffett. Visa, just a piece of card. You don't leave home without it. And JP Morgan Chase, who handles most of the transactions that would happen on most of the foreign exchange, on most of the trading exchanges, okay, globally. So truth be told, when we talk about industry, when we talk about the role of technology, when we talk about, you know, like adaptation as we need to, okay, you know, like it may not be that we should be looking at brick and mortar anymore. In fact, brick and mortar will have to exist, but brick and mortar should be but a small portion of the big picture that we need to paint for ourselves. I know that, you know, like the government has set up varying state organizations to drive technology. There's the e-tech parks that have been built. They were supposed to be landed on top of technology. I know they've done some investment in regards to doing BPO services and financial services and so on. Okay, but how much of it has taken root and how much of it has actually germinated into a tangible, self-sustaining enterprise? I do believe, having said all of that, we do have in Trinidad and Tobago the capacity, the expertise, okay, the ability to actually make an impact on some of these things. And to Professor Gonzalez's point, not necessarily being entrepreneurs with novel ideas, okay, but in working with, in joint ventures, in partnering and establishing relationships with some of these kinds of companies, if not these actual ones in the top 10, okay, so that we can start turning the Titanic that is Trinidad and Tobago, okay, and steer it in a direction that instead of hitting an iceberg and being sunken, okay, we can actually, you know, stave ourselves on that path. How many of you on this webinar, okay, appreciate that BP has, if I remember correctly, 13 platforms. And 8 of those 13 platforms are called NUIs, normally unmanned installations. On any given day, on most given days, there isn't a single human soul on 8 of these platforms, okay? They were built, they were conceptualized, they were set, with the intent to never have a soul on them, save and except for doing repair or routine maintenance given the environment that they're in. Yet still, those 8 platforms, offshore platforms, account for the major portion of gas production in Trinidad and Tobago. The point to take away from that is technology and its infusion is already here. Okay, it's already widely used in the oil and gas industry. Okay, unfortunately, it wasn't used across the entire industry. Hence, in part, in a small part, it had a role to play in us seeing the demise of Petro-Trinity refinery as we know it. To specifically answer the question that Roger would have posed, okay, well, how our thinking as a country is today, okay, there's certainly the political influence. I personally have no political aspirations or anything associated there with. Okay, but the powers that be, the ones who we put in charge of us and in developing our societies. When you think about ministries, for example, each ministry is a siloed organization with its own mandate, okay, and the minister who does sets policy and have advisors to so do, and an organization to deliver, okay? The siloed way of thinking, acting, and operating must go away, full stop. And that's where it is we're seeing happening in more versatile and adaptable countries like Singapore, like Finland, like Norway, okay, like in Canada, okay, that even though there's a minister, okay, behind these ministries, you know, behind these organizations, there are all these smaller organizations of experts who share knowledge and who look at things, you know, holistically as opposed to looking at things unilaterally. I have a current situation I'm addressing, for example, okay, and it was a popular topic in the news last week, actually. Okay, the whole idea of electronic IDs. And I could tell you, I've had conversations with certain individuals in government or associated therewith, okay, and they're all about, you know, like, oh, we should not be using electronic IDs, okay, or the population is not ready for it, one or the other. Okay, and I just came back a couple of months ago, just before this whole COVID-19 thing actually happened, okay, from Hungary. Okay, now while in Hungary, you know, again, getting some training for my own self, okay, I'm a consultant in the field to some extent. And the training in the room, okay, there was a question all about, can we all get our IDs, pull out our IDs, and they will show us, you know, like what was the embedded information thereon. And I took one of my co-workers with me. Okay, and we were the only ones in that class, and there were people from all across the world, by the way, okay, where our IDs, for example, did not, as it exists today, did not have an iota of biometric information built in. It couldn't be scanned, okay? Whereas, you know, like IDs, passports, driver's permits, and so on in all other parts of the world, or many other countries in the world, I wouldn't say all, okay, that is the norm and has been the norm for 20 years, okay? It's reached a level of evolution now where it is that an ID is now something that can be found on a mobile phone, okay? A driver's permit is something that can be found on a mobile phone. E-passports exist on a mobile phone. We need to, as I said, as a government, start looking ahead, start looking at what is to come, start looking at what is already here, holistically, as I said, not in a unitary fashion, item by item, okay, and start integrating those thoughts into our decision making. So the question that was posed, okay, with regards to the digital divide, okay, there is a digital divide, but then you have to question why there is a digital divide. Trinidad and Tobago has one of the highest penetrations in the world of cell phones, mobile phone telephony, one of the highest per capita penetrations in the world, but yet still there's a mobile divide, okay? You wonder. Notwithstanding, I would say this, okay, I've had part of my career in the oil and gas industry, and another part of my career in the telecoms industry. Way back when, and I don't think it was ever changed and it was ever fully evolved to where it should be, there was something called the Universal Service Fund. And the Universal Service Fund was levied on the sole operator at the time, Telco, which became TSTT. Okay, and what it was about is that there was no natural incentive, you know, for that company to go and put, you know, like telephony services, in those days, fixed lines in Mamural, okay, in the most remotest parts of the country, because there were just very small clusters of people living there, and the cost of landline facilities and poles and networks and so on were pretty expensive. So the Universal Service Fund was a levy, was a tax that was levied on the phone companies. And then the organization, the government at the time, there was no regulator, but specified to them, for whatever reason, political or otherwise, you need to go to Mamaral. You need to go build lines out there. We know it's going to be unprofitable for you, but we're going to take the same tax that we've taken from you, call the Universal Service Fund, okay, and we're going to then essentially give it back to you with the purpose of you building that facility to that location. In the modern day equivalent of that, okay, has to be a national Wi-Fi network. Very simply, okay? And it doesn't mean that you have Wi-Fi in every street corner, okay? That could be the end goal, okay? But the short-term way of getting there, okay, will be starting at all government offices, okay? Starting at schools, starting at community centers, starting at fire stations, starting at nursing homes, starting at early childhood care locations and so on. So that in every community where there's one of these, in fact, even fields as well, sporting grounds, so that there's a possibility by infusing Wi-Fi at all these facilities, that any and every citizen in walking distance to where they live can access a point where it is that they have the ability to have low cost or free Wi-Fi. Okay, I would have actually participated in a project like that, okay, that was actually paid for by one of the telecoms operators in Bahamas last year. I spent almost a year traveling back and forth, project managing and program managing one such build, okay? And their cost model, this was a private entity, this wasn't driven by government, and their cost model was they would offer it highly subsidized or if not free to the population, okay, by selling ads. So you want to use Wi-Fi, you switch your phone on, okay, and like you have to look at an ad, you know, like to buy a beer, you know, to shop at the store, whatever else the case might be. So there are models. I'm not saying that that's the only one, but there are models in terms of what can be funded, universal fund, okay, or advertising or a combination thereof. But I'm seeming to think that, you know, like with that implementation of a national Wi-Fi network, for example, okay, it will allow every citizen in Trinidad and Tobago to at least gain access to the internet. Okay, now gaining access to the internet is just one part of it. Okay, the other part of it is making sure that we have content, okay, that is relevant and available, okay, which we do to some extent, to the major extent, but you also have to incentivize, you know, like the people who are accessing the internet, okay, to want to use it. It's one thing to talk about the digital divide. But it's another thing, we wear, I know, like we should be wearing a shame cap, that Trinidad and Tobago per capita is one of the highest consumers of porn in the world. Why? Okay, so it's the internet gives us access. And whereas, you know, people on this webinar and myself, we spend like 99.9% of the times, you know, like actually Googling, learning, reading, researching, maybe another 1% doing some other manner of arbitrary entertainment, if not gaming. Okay, why it is the majority portion of our population are using the same facility and what they want to do is use it, you know, for pornography. We need to change that. Okay, but specific to the government now, okay, as I said, and the chapter that you, Dr. Hussain, would have invited me to be part of, which, you know, like Professor Gonzalez is part of as well. Okay, I've been advocating for the longest while. Okay, I seem to think, you know, that our future lies in part, okay, with planning for the future, full stop. And how do we plan for the future? Is that we should have a permanent think tank. And that permanent think tank should have academics, professionals, okay, practitioners, laypersons of a wide and varied spectrum, housewives even, okay, you know, and constantly be looking at where we are today, helping in part to define the policy of where we need to be, looking at the technology, looking at world evolution, looking at what is happening in terms of practices and processes and the like, okay, and constantly having a living document that is refined every so often, okay, and that should form in part the policy framework of the governments of the day, instead of having a manifesto where promises are made, one red, one yellow, okay, and what happens is that, you know, the person who wins, okay, you know, like would try to enforce some of his manifesto, never all, and what would have been started by the previous gets thrown by the wayside. There's some projects, some activities, some things that we should be doing as a country that is going to take more than 5 years to do. And be that as it may, they should not be allowed to be changed by the policies of government. Okay, they should be entrenched into some framework where delivery must continue. Okay, so that there's a policy decision to be made by the powers that be. And I don't think any technologist, any economist, or anybody on this chat who, unless you have that influence over or get some of those parties to listen, we can ever see that happening in our lifetime, which could lead to our detriment. And I will end up with that.
Okay, Mr. Small, thank you very much for your contribution. I notice Professor Gonzalez is raising his hand physically.
Yes, you asked me about the question. You raised the question about resilience, which Andy had raised. That asked me to respond briefly to it. Just let me say, just before I do that, I think I misconstrued Ronald's question about synergies. I think he was referring much more to what we call externalities among the various industries and so on. So that, which is to say that trained labor in one industry is useful to another industry, and they generate a lot of these synergies. I think I see a lot of that, for instance, in the proposed sectors that come out, sectors in which these consultants believe that we can be competitive, all these service sectors and so forth. There seems to be a lot of synergies and technology used in one. A lot of them, the ICT sector sort of runs through all of them, so that there's a fair amount of synergies I see emerging out of that. But I really wanted to go on to Andy's question about resilience, and I'm glad he asked it because it's something I've been reflecting on quite a bit. Today I was listening to a program where they were talking about NATO getting involved in another dimension of security, which is not the traditional one of the brick and mortar thing that Small was talking about, the tanks and the warplanes and the satellites and so forth, but more one in terms of economic security, stocking the food, stocking the medicines and so forth. Because what they have shown is that already, and the WTO is pointing it out, you have a whole lot of trade barriers going on in medical products, in wheat and in rice and so forth. People are stockpiling and so forth. Now just imagine these large countries are already doing that, and they're talking about forming some kind of NATO that would allow them to be able to protect themselves in situations like this, which they never anticipated. What is left for us? We small little island economies, just think about it. And I've been wondering, for instance, whether we in CARICOM should not look at this, and I agree with Patrick, much larger role. We have the land, we have the water, we have the resources, and we can provide the basic foodstuffs that we need to survive. And we have to begin to think in that survival mode, because nobody is going to think about that for us. We're going to be left on our own here in the years ahead, and if another COVID-20 comes back or whatever comes back, we are going to be left to fend on our own. So we have to look for partners out there that we think are secure partners, that we could rely on them. We could do the stockpiling together with them. We can produce certain medicines and certain foodstuffs that will guarantee us some kind of survival. And I think we have the resources to do it. We need to put it together. Now, CARICOM has a food and nutrition plan, which has existed since the 1990s. And I think in 2010, they elaborated it into a full-fledged plan. So there's already a framework that exists there in terms of food security. And I think some people have already gone ahead and they have invested in Guyana. I don't know how many people have invested in Belize or Suriname, but we have a basis on which to build this whole question of resilience. And we have to be very mindful of the fact, it's not just this COVID-19, it's the fact that every year we suffer from hurricanes. And then we have the odd earthquake that comes through every so many years, and it's totally destructive. So we have to begin to sit down seriously and begin to think about our future economic security. Nobody's going to do that for us. And unless, I think, as I said, we have the framework in which to do it. It's very difficult for us to do it on our own. Each individual island just doesn't have the scale, the resources to be able to do it. So that I think, and already I saw where CARICOM has had a ministerial meeting on this question of food security, I believe last week or week before. And so already people are beginning to reflect on this, and I think it's certainly something we need to develop. Certainly resilience has come on the table now in a very stark reality, because we have never faced it as like this before. You know, those of us had the foreign exchange and we could afford to do our own stockpiling and buy our own food, so it wasn't as urgent. But I think now we have to really see the world in a very, very different way. Thank you.
Dr. Gonzalez, thank you.
Can I ask a question, please?
Sure. And Professor Watson wanted to make a short contribution.
Yeah, and in fact, I have to, because I have to go. I'm not young like some of you. I have to go and do a few things. I want to say very, very quickly, I am perhaps more pessimistic than, let's say, my colleague Peter Gonzalez is on what can be used that we have. I am particularly doubtful about the ability of the manufacturing sector as it currently is structured and so on for going forward. I am not at all saying, for instance, that the energy sector must be ignored. That's not true at all. Well, what is happening and what is going on in the world is we have to be thinking very, very aggressively about replacing it and about making a way for other forms of energy, even for ourselves. And on the matter of the Houseman, I have to say very, very quickly, you should really read it. It does not in any way say that if you're in the energy sector, you're stuck in the energy sector. It actually talks about a collection of skills that you have and a collection of resources that you have that allowed, for instance, Finland to go from cotton wood to making Nokia phones. So that's the kind of transition that you're talking about. It's the skills and the endowments that you develop, whether it's in the energy sector, that may allow you to move beyond it. So we are going to have to look, and this is where I buy into what Mr. Small said, coming down to the end of his contribution. We cannot do this thing properly without there being a permanent arrangement where we are thinking and planning ahead at goals that may shift, but concentrating on the short run, which is inevitable and which must be done, especially using the ways that we are accustomed to, is not going to get us very far. The world has already changed radically, if only because some of the worst recessions are being predicted for countries of Western Europe, in particular Britain, which is a major trading partner in this part of the world, in particular the United States of America. How are you going to move out of that? If you're producing manufactured goods, for whom? Who is going to buy it? It's not going to be bought in the United States of America. We cannot compete. It's not going to be bought by CARICOM because they don't have the wherewithal because of what is happening to the tourism sector. We have to think rapidly about moving beyond the short term and of not thinking simply of what we have at this point in time for moving forward. Thanks very much. I'm going to have to go in a short while. So if you see me disappear, that's
Professor Watson, thank you very much for your time. Dr. Hussain, I would hand over to you to answer the question specifically. In you asking the question, I'd also like you to think about a question that was raised in our chat in terms of how do we deal with the short run decrease in reserves.
Okay, I would pose my question. I would make my comment to Professor Watson, and I would send it to him via WhatsApp as well, so he will get a chance to respond. My concern is with this forest example, with this analogy using the forest, is we already have several trade agreements in place. Now, if one were to carefully examine these trade agreements, you would see that for some of these trade agreements, we have missed opportunities. Missed opportunities are where, say for example, CARICOM. CARICOM is buying more of a commodity that we are selling less of. So if we could raise what we produce of the commodity that CARICOM is buying more of, then that's an opportunity for us. And whilst moving from cutting forest trees and cutting wood to Nokia phones is good, and we should all, that should be, as Ronald Ramkissoon raised earlier, that should be our intent in moving from point C to point D in terms of the production possibility frontier. There are steps along the way that we shouldn't miss in terms of the type of well thought out framework that Professor Gonzalez mentioned. And I just wanted to throw it out, and I will write them on it, Professor Watson, that we need to look at our missed opportunities. We need to make these missed opportunities very clearly available to our private sector and to our Exim Bank and to our export TT so that they can guide the use of foreign exchange as needed in terms of where low-hanging opportunities lie. Remember, these are already goods we are producing, already goods we are exporting. For some reason, we are now producing and exporting less, but the demand is high in various partner countries. So therefore, with the right type of investment, we can reverse that fortune. Okay. I see the time is 8:48, so I will stop there and just leave one question to Wayne Small, which is my concern, Wayne, with all, and we have, everybody here is a part of the national conversations. My concern that we have raised there as well is we only have 1.3 million people. And whilst 1.3 million people is certainly not 50,000, I often wonder if with our factor endowment capabilities, if we have to be smart in choosing the battles that we pick, because we wouldn't be able to enter into a wide range of battles. I could easily venture off here into the Aruba, Venezuela discussion, but I will stop there because it's the right time to let the others comment. So I will stop there.
Okay, Dr. Hussain, thanks. Ladies and gentlemen, we are approaching 9 o'clock. And I know that the conversation is really getting interesting. But what I would like the panelists to do as we begin to wrap up with 9 p.m. in mind is put forward their closing comments, and if there is any outstanding questions that would have been directed to them, to answer those questions in their wrap-up. I would like Mr. Small to speak first, then Dr. Gonzalez, and finally Dr. Hussain in your wrap-up before we close off at 9 p.m. Mr. Small?
Right, well, thank you again, Rebecca. So first I want to thank Dr. Hussain and yourself for actually inviting me to participate and share my own thoughts. We are at an inflection point, okay, in our economy and in life as we know it in Trinidad and Tobago. Okay, and we're speaking here in a very small microcosm. Okay, I think, like some of the messages that have been discussed here needs to reach the powers that be. Okay, to Dr. Hussain's just the most recent point, okay, we are actually the David, and the rest of the world and COVID-19 presents us with the Goliath. Okay, and we certainly, cannot take on every battle, okay, or take it on frontally. We can expect to win. So we need to be nimble. We need to pick our battles. Okay, and in picking our battles, we need to make, decisions that are short-term, mandatorily, given the fact that we have to make sure we can feed, clothe, but can keep healthy as much as possible every one of the 1.3 million people that live on the island. But you also need to look at, near term, okay, medium term, long term. Okay, and where we are as a dot in the bigger ocean, a population of 7 billion, okay, for us to survive, we cannot continue to exist on an oil and gas economy. I think that's a given. That's a don't care condition for everyone. Okay, we have to look at, other ways of doing business, other activities to get into. I am saying, okay, my own view is, yes, manufacturing is important, okay, but manufacturing may not necessarily get us where we need to go. It's necessary in the short term, again, to impact import substitution, okay, and to save on foreign exchange. Okay, but what we need to do is actually, get into economies and get into activities that actually generate foreign exchange for us. Okay, so, and that's where, as I said, data is the new oil. Okay, we can sell our hands. We can sell our mechanical skills. That is going to put a limit to how far we can go. But if it is we sell our brain, okay, and our expert power across a range of industries, I think it allows us to be better at like generating income, diversifying the economy, okay, having an impact in the world without having to even travel there. Our borders can remain closed, and we're selling skills that are transportable, okay, via the internet or via electronic means, as opposed to selling tangibles.
Yes, well, let me thank Roger and Rebecca for inviting me to this discussion. I think it's a good start, and we need to continue it. The chat alone is not enough. I think we need to have these public sessions where we get feedback, and we could refine our positions. Let me end where I started, which is to say that I think the crisis provides us with a very unique opportunity to engage in the transformation that we have always desired since our independence. But it has eluded us over the years because we have not been able to get our act together. And that had largely to do with the fact of taking tough decisions, knowing how to ride out these booms and these busts that we encountered since 1962. We would have a good 10 years and a lean 10 years, and so we would go up and down and so on, never knowing how to ride out these cycles properly and develop ourselves over the long term. We have failed in a sense to be able to do like Norway and develop a sovereign wealth fund that is properly managed with the proper fiscal rules that would stop a boom from destroying the economy. So that what has happened here over all these years, we could go back to all the booms. I think Roger has done that work and has shown it. Show all these booms where we have been destroyed by this Dutch disease. Those in the non-tradable sector have just pounced on us, and they have made a killing. They have sort of put their money aside and put it abroad in the foreign banks and so forth, and have waited for the next boom and so forth. And we have not gotten the kind of dynamic non-energy sector which will allow us to be able to engage in that transformation. Certainly, we have made some progress. There has been some diversification, largely within the energy sector. I think we have to be, in a sense, thankful for some of that. We have been able to build point leases and so forth, but we have not gone far enough. We need to go much further than that in terms of building a much more vibrant non-energy sector with services as well as manufacturing. Now, it's very hard to say whether we have a future in manufacturing or not. I was to some extent skeptical about manufacturing years ago when I saw what was happening in China. And many people today would look at us and say, well, you don't stand a chance in manufacturing. But when I look at the winners that are being picked by government and the private sector, I tend to see a large component of services. A lot of them, if you look, most of them are already in the service sector. And I think to some extent that may be correct, which is to say that we are going to become much more of a service-oriented economy, which is where I think Mr. Small has been heading in terms of pointing us to the fact that we may need to look at that area of intangibles, that software area, where you have tremendous possibilities, and we can, as a small country, perform pretty well in that and get the kind of exports that we're looking for. But I'm not totally dismayed by manufacturing. I think we still have certain niches in manufacturing which we should seek to exploit. I think we have a basis on which we can probably continue to be relatively competitive in the beverage sector. And there are others there that we can continue to exploit. A lot of them do not necessarily need any fantastic new technology, although innovation would help. And we can basically survive on the fact that we have good organization. We inject a certain kind of uniqueness of organization. That is to say, like the Koreans did years ago, you organize the plant in a particular way and you inject your own culture into it and you're able to compete. I think some of that may come out in our manufacturing that may allow us to survive. But what I'm trying to hint at is that we need to get the sequencing right. And I think this has been a question that has bedeviled us here this evening, which is to say, are we going to get stuck in a recovery where we waste foreign exchange and we waste a lot of subsidies and so on? I think we have to be careful about that. But I think we can overcome it insofar as if from day one, this is why I started where I have started, from day one we have a clear long-term vision of where we want to go. And we know that, okay, we cannot waste so much money on foreign exchange on the recovery period, otherwise we won't have enough to help us with the transformation. We have to see how those resources are being allocated from day one, not to get to be trapped in that point C that Roger is talking about. So I'm not too worried about the sequencing thing. I think for the first time, where it is clear to, I think everybody now that we're not going to see the gas economy come back again, even if we find more gas. So that we have, in a sense, now to buckle down and decide to really develop that non-energy sector. So I'm hopeful that over in the coming years, months, even though the world economy may be unpredictable and we may not be able to say with 20 degrees of certainty as to what are the sectors we need to get into, I think we have to be nimble, and we have the, in a sense, the cadre of entrepreneurs and people to begin that transformation. We are not starting from scratch. We have been over 50 years involved in manufacturing and various things. We are highly educated people. So that I'm pretty hopeful that, we can make that transformation. I think we all need to put our heads up together. And as Ronald said, put the synergies together and we'll be certainly home and dry. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Gonzalez. Dr. Hossain?
Yes, so I only have 2 minutes. So I would just say thank you for everyone for joining. We had a little hiccup in the beginning in terms of some of the technology. We would sort that out going forward. And we would try sometime in the near future to host another seminar like this. I'd like to say on behalf of Wayne Small, myself, and Gonzalez, Rebecca Gookool, and Professor Watson, we are part of a national conversation group in which we try to keep ideas, flowing and discussions lively, which we, in various little ways, we filter into the hands of the public. We bring it to the we announce it in different ways so that the politicians and the people at the helm of the economy can see what we are saying and on different platforms and in different spaces. And we will continue on behalf of the people to do that. So with those few words, I would just say to everyone, continue to be COVID-free and COVID-clean, and let's keep Trinidad and Tobago on the pathway to coming out of this lockdown. I thank you.
Okay, everyone, thank you for your time. And with that, I say good night and have a pleasant evening.
Right.
Right.